The heavyweight division is always changing, and so too the faces in it, as amateurs turn over to the pros and veterans hang up the gloves for good. At any one time, there are dozens of heavyweight prospects early in their careers looking to break through, make a mark, and eventually move on up to be in title contention. This video focuses on the emerging names in the division. Many of these fighters only have a handful of fights or less, or they have some buzz behind them from their amateur days, but are yet to face anyone of note for us to get a proper read on what they're all about. But let's be clear, this is not my best heavyweight prospects list. I'll cover that off in another video, so don't need to mention Daniel Dubois, Filip Hrgovic, and so on. This video is about the fighters who are largely living in the shadow of the big name prospects who've already been pro for 3 or 4 years now. So I have 15 names for you to keep an eye out for, as well as a few honourable mentions. And just bear in mind, not all of these fighters will ascend to the top of the division. The ceiling for some might only be top 30, top 50, and some will likely fall and have mishaps in their prospect phase. Projecting a prospect's trajectory always comes with a healthy dose of uncertainty. But without further ado, let's begin. So buckle up. Let's go. Number 1. Magomedrasul Majidov, the 6'3" former amateur world champion who also owns a win over Anthony Joshua from 10 years ago. The 33-year-old from Azerbaijan currently has 2 pro fights under his belt, having turned pro in September 2019 after signing a promotional deal with Matchroom, which will want to push the amateur standout who's a good technician that carries good power, as was seen in his second pro fight against journeyman Tom Little. He did though have a scare in his first pro fight, being dropped by Ed Fountain, but expect him to be moved faster than younger prospects, and I'm certainly interested to see how much upside he has. The obvious question to ask in his case is, did Majidov leave it too late to turn pro? Number 2. Mihai Nistor turned pro in December 2019 following a long amateur career which include wins over Fraser Clark, Filip Hrgovic, and he also famously stopped Anthony Joshua in 2011. He's a solid heavyweight with good power, but at 5'11", the Romanian may struggle against some of the taller timber in the heavyweight division. So far he's had 2 pro fights and he's looked okay, but given his win over Joshua way back when, there is some buzz behind him and interest in what he might be able to do as a pro. Nistor is signed to Golden Boy, which has just 2 heavyweights on its books, the other being Arslanbek Makhmedov, who once actually stopped Nistor in a fight Nistor was clearly winning. Number 3. Viktor Vikhryst, who is also referred to as Victor Faust, is a 2-time European amateur champion who turned over to being a professional in 2020 and has 1 pro fight under his belt. The 27-year-old has good size at 6'5", good skills and power, and his style is expected to translate well into the pro game. The Ukrainian might not have some of the buzz that Majidov and Nistor have, but definitely a talented fighter and one to watch out for. At 27, there is room for improvement, and arguably he has the greater upside than the first 2 names on this list. Number 4. Jared Anderson, who goes by the nickname Big Baby, is the first of 3 top-ranked prospects on this list. The 20-year-old American is a former 2-time amateur national champion who is one of the brightest prospects coming out of the USA right now. At 6'4", he has good size to go along with good power and solid fundamentals, which have been on display in his first 3 pro fights, which have all ended in the first round. Anderson has a ton of talent and potential, and at just 20, could be a name that will be around the heavyweight division for more than a decade. Number 5. Jared Anderson's top-ranked stablemate Sonny Canto is another American prospect with some buzz and expectation behind his name. The 24-year-old, who was once a talented baseball player, turned pro in 2019 following a brief 9-fight amateur career, which culminated in a 2018 loss in the Golden Gloves final. Conto, while listed at 6'4", does have a smaller frame than other heavyweights and has come under 220 pounds for all of his 6 pro fights. But what is apparent is he's a real athlete with good hand speed, good combinations, and to look at him, you wouldn't know that he'd only had a limited amateur career. Like Adeson, there is obvious talent there, and he will be around the division for years to come. Also, a side note, make sure to watch Sonny Canto's first pro fight. That was with Jimmy Levins. It's one of the strangest fights I think I've ever seen. Levins unable to keep his footing, falling over 4 times or so in that fight. None of them ruled a knockdown. Number 6. The third top-ranked prospect who's garnering his own share of attention is the Italian prospect Guido Vianello, who's in his mid-20s and seemingly improving all the time. The 6'6" fighter known as the Gladiator is a former well-seasoned amateur whose style is expected to translate well into the pro game, being able to combine good height, reach and his well-drilled boxing skills. To date, Vianello, who is now being trained by Kevin Barry after a stint at the start of his career with Abel Sanchez, has looked sharp and powerful in his early fights. And arguably, Vianello has one of the best gimmicks of anyone on this list, known as the Gladiator, and coming out to the ring with a Gladiator helmet on. Number 7. American Ronnie Hines, who is currently 8-0. Arguably out of this list, he's got one of the lower profiles of all the 15 fighters. Like Conto, Hines had an abbreviated amateur career with just 5 fights, and in fact, he was the one that beat Conto in the 2018 Golden Gloves final. Quietly, the 6'6" American has built an 8-0 record in almost obscurity, but depending on how he's guided, he does have the potential to make some noise down the line, and at 24, he's got plenty of time to develop. Number 8. Fabio Wardley, the 6'5", 25-year-old turned pro with no amateur background back in 2017. He would later link up with Dillian Whyte to manage him, and has previously been in one of Alexander Usyk's training camps. The Brit is currently 8-0, having featured on a number of matchroom shows, for the most part looking powerful against limited opposition. His association with Whyte, including sparring opportunities, has been good for his craft and career more broadly. Whether his inexperience will catch up with him is a question, but for a fighter with no real background in the sport to speak of, Wardley has made every poster winner so far, and it's likely he will only get better. Number 9. Another UK prospect garnering some buzz and interest after signing for Queensberry Promotion is the 23-year-old prospect David Adeleye, who was one of the main sparring partners for Tyson Fury ahead of his rematch with Deontay Wilder. He, like Wardley, turned pro with limited experience in the sport, so working with Fury would have been hugely beneficial for the 6'4.5" Londoner, who looked powerful in his first pro fight. Like Wardley, Adeleye is a work in progress, another good athlete who could develop into something dangerous if given enough time to round out his skill set and build experience. Number 10. The 22-year-old Peter Kadiru was a standout in the youth ranks and even owns a win over Daniel Dubois, albeit it was Dubois' first amateur fight back in 2014. The German, who was promoted by SES, has quietly worked his way to a 7-0 record, and while there is a question about how much power he does possess, the 6'4.5" Kadiru undoubtedly has good skills and a solid base to develop from. Number 11. 33-year-old Michael Polite Coffie turned pro late, also on the back of just 2 amateur fights. Polite Coffie, who has been a sparring partner for Deontay Wilder previously, has built up a record of 9-0 since turning pro at the end of 2017. At 6'5", Polite Coffie is a big, imposing and powerful figure, as this knockout here proves. Number 12. Willis Mian out of Australia is one of the most naturally talented and athletic fighters on this list, having grown up in a boxing household with his father being former heavyweight Carly Mian. The 24-year-old's pro career has been very stop-start, with just 9 fights since 2014, and that's partly due to him also pursuing a career in rugby league. In recent fights, Meehan has been well over 280 pounds, although he's one of those fighters that to look at him, you wouldn't think he was that much, and he carries it better than most, although it could catch up with him later in his career. The question now is, will Willis Mian build on his obvious talent? Because if he does, he could be in some very good fights down the line.
Number 13.
The unbeaten Dusan Veletic, who has a record of 4 wins and 1 draw, gains inclusion on this list courtesy of his win in late 2019 over the previously unbeaten prospect Albon Pervezaj. Until that fight, Pervezaj was generally well regarded and in the second tier of prospects coming through, so a good win for Dusan Veletic.
Number 14.
German Erik Pfeiffer, who is currently 7-0. The 33-year-old turned pro late in 2018 after an 8-year amateur career that included wins over Zhili Zhang and also Mihai Nistor. Like some older prospects on this list who have well-rounded skill sets, time may prove to be something not on his side if he can't progress at a certain rate.
Number 15.
Ruslan Myrsatayev is another name most will not be familiar with. The Kazakh fighter is currently 7-0, with 2019 wins over Danny Williams and also Yuri Bakotsu, the same Yuri Bakotsu that Robert Helenia struggled to a split decision win over in 2018. Those 2 wins are primarily why he's included on this list. However, time may not be on the side of the 34-year-old, who has not been very active since turning pro, and even as an amateur only had 9 fights over 9 years. And now to the honourable mentions. First up, Timothy Moten, currently 5-0 but yet to face anyone with a winning record. The 28-year-old American served as one of Anthony Joshua's primary sparring partners ahead of the Andy Ruiz rematch. Next up, Arslan Iallyev, the 6'5" Russian who is currently 8-0 and at just 23 has plenty of time to develop. Next up, Gunnar Kolbienn Kristinsson, the sole Icelandic heavyweight who had been campaigning in obscurity until recently when he signed a promotional pact with Salita Promotions, since gaining a number of articles and exposure. The 31-year-old is now 11-0 and training at the Kronk Gym in Detroit. Next up, Ljungquist, the 6'6.5" Danish heavyweight who was promoted by Team Sauerland, has a long amateur background and has built a record of 10-0 since 2017. And Amron Sands, the 6'6" American who at 25 years old has a record of 10-0.